Hello, everyone. Hello, Anastasia from Australian UB's blog is here. How's everyone going? Today is a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and as per normal, we're working live, so you will be able to ask questions. You will be able to provide your comments, likes. You're welcome to share this post and stuff like that. So, as you know, Australian UB's blog shares the story of Australian businesses. But today, I have a very exclusive interview with someone very, very special and someone I think that a lot of you would be interested to know more about. I've got Jack Roney here. How are you, Jack, today?
G'day, Anastasia. Thanks for having me. No, I'm really well, thanks. It's a real privilege to get to speak to you today.
Absolutely. Look, just a bit of a background. Jack Roney is a former detective and policeman. You spent 30 years in law enforcement, and you are also the author the crime thriller series, The Angels Wept, The Demons Walk, and The Shadows Watch. Am I right?
That's correct.
The best thing I liked about you that you're actually the graduate of Curtis Brown Creative. Because because this is one of the modules I've done when I used to study back to Swinburne University with the colliding lots of different modules, including Curtis University, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
So
you're right, because you don't know what you don't know, and I think a lot of us think we can write, but it's not until you do these writing courses and you realize there's a lot of nuances and special skills that writing craft that you need to have. And when I look at some of the stuff I wrote years ago, and I did those writing courses, and I think, I kind of cringe at some of that early work. So I certainly encourage anyone that's interested in doing writing, invest in the time to do some proper writing courses.
Absolutely. And I think obviously education always helps us to strengthen certain skills and to understand a bit of a more subject. But it's also, for me, also the writer, the author is a bit of a collaboration of skill, experience, and your passion. And today I want to talk about your passion. And your passion is a thriller detective stories that you created. And one of your latest stories is the book is actually The Angels Wept. It's a very interesting name, by the way. We know that thriller is always about anticipation. It's about anxiety. It keeps the reader on the edge of the edge of this chair until the end of the book. We don't know who is the killer, who is this guy, or who is this girl. And the character is always chased. The character is always haunted till the end. And to me personally, when I wrote about your background, I realized that you're trying to bring your experience and confess to what you experienced as a former detective and policeman. And then the question to me was, are you trying to trigger actually reality of 21st century, or are you trying to collaborate with your experience? So what is it? How you find that collaboration of these two?
I think when I first set out and when I first started writing, I didn't really have any long-term plan. I just started writing because I had this inbuilt I felt there was, I guess, a need to start writing. And I always talk about some people may write a diary, or maybe not even be able to express their feelings, and they bottle things up. And I was probably bottling things up for a long time. I'd been working as a child protection detective for a long time, a number of years, and had been exposed to a number of sort of sad cases. So I was probably bottling up a lot of this stuff. And for me, writing was my way of expressing myself. So I didn't really set out to write a book or to I didn't really have a long-term plan. It was purely just my own personal need to start expressing the way I was feeling. And I felt the best way to do that for me was to just start writing stories. And there was a lot of linkages to my own personal experiences. And that's really what drove me to start writing. And then from that, a lot of sort of key messages started coming out about the story behind the detective, and the story behind the victims, and the story behind the offender. So I suppose for me there was kind of three parts to it, and each of them had their own different perspectives. So I drew a lot of my own inspiration from things that I'd experienced myself, and so from that I felt that I was kind of telling the story from an authentic point of view, from someone who's been there and done that. So a lot of the stuff that I write, particularly in that first book, The Angels Wept, was very much about me. I keep using the expression, I was sort of bleeding onto the page. I was just getting all this stuff off my chest onto the pages. And then once I kind of started to purge, I then started to formulate a story. when I wrote my first chapter, that was kind of centered around this real pivotal sort of homicide scene. I then thought, okay, well, this is a really good catalyst for me to start building a story and fictional characters, and that's kind of how it kind of evolved over time.
As I always knew back from my school days, fiction is not really fiction. It's always based on some facts. Yeah, it's an inspiration of the author. So they're just trying to bring that creative story that doesn't exist into a different level. But it's always backed up by sort of facts, yeah, reality. And I love fiction personally, I do. And it's incredible the way that the author has this ability to collaborate with your experience, with confession. Because I think what you're trying to say, you pretty much put all of these dot points. It's like a confession. You're writing the story and you're putting everything out of your chest. But it's also maybe the message to a reader, right? So the message, and this is what I'm always trying to understand. When you're writing the thriller, what emotion you're trying to cause or trigger for the reader, what they should feel when they're actually reading the story. I know it's not your responsibility to understand what they feel, but anyway, as the author, you're trying to achieve the result, and you want to, take those inner demons out of the people. So what the emotion you're trying to trigger in your stories?
I think I started by writing about how I felt, and by doing so, I was hoping my readers would relate to the way I was feeling, and that would also, they would sort of, they would have this sort of relationship with the characters. So, yeah, it was very much about introducing these different characters, and the turmoil, the trauma, the different experiences they'd gone through, and I think initially I just want to write a good story. I want to write a story that is true to the thriller genre, that it's a page turner, that people will, it's confronting, it's true in terms of, no, the story's not true, it's a fictional story, I have to stress that, but the feelings are true. I like to talk about what, you see these Hollywood films and how they portray detective, and how they, it's very much about the detective being the hero. But I think in my stories that the actual heroes are the victims. And their story is being told through the detective. And I think for me, that's the difference. If I look at the true heroes in my first book, it's the children characters. And these kids were exposed to a horrific event. They were effectively hunted down by the offender, and they escaped, and they showed their strength and resilience. And I think that's probably for me the key thing that I'm wanting my readers to identify with. But secondly, also to identify with the detective, and as to what motivates him. He's a family man. He's affected by a lot of sad cases that he's been exposed to. So you really get to see the police detective as just an average guy who's a family man, and he's been thrust into these investigations which wear him down over time. So I've tried to put together all these key concepts to make a very authentic but also an enjoyable read, that people will want to continue to find out what happens next, and to keep turning the pages.
Yeah, that's it. You still want to wait till the end. Yeah, that's just anticipating what's next, and that's what makes the story enticing. Yeah, but rather than boring and just a black and white. Look, I honestly believe that thrillers is always about chasing. It's about survival. The victim's always trying to survive, and survival. It's not necessarily physical survive. It's also mental survival. Because after physical, say if somebody was killed, yeah, and the victims, just say kids left alone by themselves, it's emotional trauma, as you said, and it's always about survival. Do you think in the literature, in generally speaking, we readers, the audience, love the topic of survival, and we need a special attention in the literature to this particular subject?
Absolutely. And I think when you're talking about survival, resilience, if I look at my own personal survival as a person, as a police officer and author, that's what got me writing. It was my own therapy. So for my own way to kind of get my head out of a fairly dark place, because when I was writing the first book, I was still very much immersed in that world. So the actual act of writing was therapy in itself, and it enabled me to kind of survive and get through the work that I was doing. In the end, I ended up moving out of that work after nearly 15 years of that work. I moved out and went on to different things. But so from that first point of view, the survival was very important for me. It was as a coping mechanism. The writing helped me get through that and kind of helped me examine how was I really feeling about the job that I was doing. So that was kind of the personal side of it. But then there's the survival of the characters in the book. And I already spoke about the children who were the victims and how they survived with the loss of their parents and how they used each other for strength and how they gave strength to the detective. You know, he was inspired by the strength shown by the kids and how the detective coped with that. And also focuses on, you know, what we perceive as the bad guy, the offender. But the offender, and in my book, there's actually more than one sort of key antagonist, and there's some explanation as to what motivated them, because really if you ask the bad guy, are you a bad guy, they're going to say no, I'm not a bad guy. They justify what they're doing. So it all tells the story as well, you know, and the hardships and the traumas that they'd experienced as to what drove them to do some horrific things. So I think there's a lot of key elements, and you're right that, you know, survival resilience is a key theme in a lot of books.
Absolutely, I agree. You actually triggered my next question. Because you mentioned the offender in the story, and generally offenders even in the story there's no justification to that. There's always a story behind the offender, right? And I think as the author, did you bring that story, that background story of the offender, so the reader would be able to understand, and some readers would be able even have an empathy for that type of the person who committed the crime as it is. I don't know if we're going in the territory now of the different field here, but I think as you explained that every character's got the background, right? So did you explain in your book, The Angels Wept, the background story of the offender as well?
I think I tried to, and I kind of touched on that. And I suppose in the first book I focused more on the kids who were the victims and how they kind of fought back and survived, and their resilience and the story behind the key detective. And I did talk more, you know, probably not to the same extent in terms of the offenders and what motivated them. But I think that was what opened me up to start writing more books, and that opened up to book 2 and book 3, because I felt I needed to explore that further. Even though I had touched on it in book 1, book 2, and certainly book 3, which kind of led back to book 1, was a way of closing off some of the things that I felt needed some closure and further explanation, and going back into a little bit of a history of the offenders and what motivated them and what impacted on them. So there's, you know, one of the key offenders was a bit of a mystery, a bit of an enigma. It was a bit uncertain as to what kind of drove him. So I think that whole concept of really delving more into what motivated the offender and, or, you know, the bad guy is what prompted me to write book 2 and book 3, where I did that. I delved more into their story.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I also want to ask you, because I think you mentioned that previously, but when you're actually writing the story, what emotions do you experience? Are you more like you actually trying to imagine, to feel the story, you feel for the character, do you feel empathy for them, or you kind of sort of trying to, you know, testing your boundaries? Like the question probably would be, how far would you go with your characters and keep that black put that black spot on them, you know, get that criminal, how far would you go with your criminal activity within your book? Like, for example, we talk about the kids in your book, right? The children who were offended. And there's a certain probably parts of the story you would want to hide. You don't want to talk too much about it because it's too black. So with those types
Yeah,
of boundaries, do you have the boundaries on it or not? Or you would just tell everything as it is, as you see it? Like
I
that
think you have
kind
to
of.
filter some things, you know, and what I write is also a reflection of me as a person. So I want what I write to be professional and accurate and not step over the bounds. Clearly, when you write a thriller novel, people expect confronting scenes, they expect pace
That's
and
it.
action.
Yep.
Sometimes very confronting scenes, and I have done that, but I tried to keep it tasteful. no overuse of gratuitous violence or obscenities. Sometimes you kind of have to put a little bit of that stuff in to make it realistic and to sort of ramp up the tension. But I've really, some books I've read, I'm thinking perhaps they've crossed the line in terms of putting too much of that graphic. For me, it's more about telling the story of the characters and not being driven by violence and that sort of thing. It's more about, okay, sometimes violence does occur, but there's a reason, and telling the story behind that. And when I look at what motivated me to write book one, that was more about me purging my own feelings and sort of trying to get my head around how I was coping with that type of work. Book two and book three was more about me wanting to challenge myself and be a better writer and to write stories that people want to read. And you're sort of targeting to a very broad audience as well. So I'm trying to create stories that would appeal to a lot of people who enjoyed that kind of thriller type book. And I've had people come to me saying, I don't normally read thrillers, but I read your book, and because even though I feel that my book fits that genre of the thriller, it also goes more into being a drama where there's a lot of emphasis on the emotions and feelings of the characters involved as well. It's not just purely a fast-paced, action thriller. It's got a bit of both. And I like to think that when people read it, it'll pull on their heartstrings a little bit, that they will feel affected by the emotional side of things, but they'll also be entertained and they'll want to keep turning the page because they want to find out how the book concludes.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. Look, I honestly, when I seen one of your descriptions about you, like as the personnel, as a professional, I've seen a very interesting description that you're doing speculative fiction. So what is actually speculative fiction? We all understand what speculative means, right? But what do you mean by that?
So the speculative probably more relates to stories that have got an element of paranormal or fantasy, or science fiction, paranormal. They're generally the books that fit within the speculative fiction genre. So I've actually written 4 books. The first 3 books in the Detective Jared O'Connor series, number 1 being Wept, they're your typical thriller genre books. So people who like James Patterson, you see behind me, there's a number of James Patterson books. He was a prolific author who inspired my writing. So my first 3 books are within that crime thriller genre. The 4th book I wrote last year, and it's still in the sort of editing pre-publication phase. It is a speculative fiction. It's got an element of time travel and historical. So I broke away from that thriller kind of genre. I wanted to write something different, and that was really really good for me to actually step outside my comfort zone and write something that was outside the typical police procedural and the police thriller. It was completely different. There was no, the key character wasn't a police officer. It was more of a coming of age type story. So for me, writing something completely different in that different genre was great. And I really enjoyed the experience. And there's really less boundaries when you can kind of talk about time travel and things that are kind of, you've got people that like historical nonfiction. They might not necessarily go for that sort of the paranormal side of things, but I really find that intriguing and really interesting. So my plan is in the future is to write more stories in that speculative fiction genre, because I think it appeals to a lot of people. It's that kind of what if, the whole concept of that, the time travel and what would happen if you were able to go back and change your own destiny.
Oh, that's amazing. Time traveling, yeah, that's like a dream come true. I still have this question in, like, I can't get rid of it for some reason. Do you think that with your experience, and I know you already mentioned that, but I'm still trying to understand, you're a policeman, you're a detective, you've seen so many things, right, in this industry. And say if you take an author who doesn't have experience like you, and also writing thrillers, also doing the same kind of genre, working in the same genre, who's got more chances to deliver the message? You or that person who doesn't have the same experience as you? Is that fiction that you're doing is kind of non-fictional in a way? Or that person who just creative and doesn't have that experience is more fictional than your literature? Like, I'm still trying to understand and separate these two. In your opinion, what do you think?
It's a really interesting question, and I don't know if there's a real definitive answer. Some of the greatest thriller writers of all time were not police officers, so they
Mhm.
relied a lot on their research. Fantastic storytellers, and their craft of writing was fantastic. So I would like to think that my personal experience has given me a bit of an advantage, because I haven't had to do a lot of the research, because I know the world of policing, I know the procedures, and I can kind of talk from the heart, and I can talk from my own personal experiences. But I think that's great, and they always talk about write what you know. But I think it's very much about the craft of telling a good story, and it's got to be well written as well. So, you know, I've seen stuff that have been written by police, and you know, they might have that police knowledge, but you know, frankly, they're not great storytellers, and you know, so you need to have that balance of both. You can draw upon your own experiences, and that's why we talked earlier about doing writing courses. I think for me, I had the content, but I needed to be better at telling the story and writing
Yeah.
in a way that people are going to enjoy reading it, not being too factual, and people reading it and it looks too much like a police report and it's very boring.
Yes, that's it.
In my years of putting together court briefs and writing reports and policy reports and all these sort of things I do within a sort of a government policing context, that's boring. People don't want to read that stuff. So you really need to have a really good balance between, yes, I'm a content expert, but I can also tell a really good yarn through excellent, you know, craftsmanship and writing skills. And I feel I'm still learning. I'm always seeking out advice as to how can I be a better storyteller.
Do you think that thriller always has to bring the audience to the end, and they always expect the happy end of the story, or it's not necessarily it could be black still? Say if somebody killed and they're looking for offender, the offender found, but the offender get away with that. Is it a good final for the thriller in the book
I think
story?
you'll find that thrillers don't generally have a happy ending, like maybe perhaps romance or other types of genres. Readers are looking for some sort of conclusion. Sometimes the hero might die, or sometimes things happen which are an absolute shock or a twist. And I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking to get to the very last chapter and there be a sudden twist right at the very end, and they didn't see it coming. My book isn't who done it. You get to a point where at some point you do know who did it, but you understand, you wanting to understand why they did it, but also they're trying to capture him, and there's this kind of cat and mouse game going on. So I think people are definitely looking for a surprise. And a lot of things are unresolved in people's lives. So if they suffer trauma, it's not a happy ending all the time at the end. And I think with my case, the book does have a fairly shocking climax, and then it's kind of left at the end saying, well, even though the story's ended, these people still have a lot of wounds to heal, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not a happy ending. Everyone sort of dances off into the sunset. And also, what I've done is at the end of book one, I've given a bit of a teaser for book two, so readers are looking for more. So even though the first story is now ended, here's a bit of a teaser for how the story is now going to progress into book two. So for me, really, the story has never ended, and I guess that's life. I mean, we have obstacles and hurdles in our life, but we can never just wrap it up and put a bow around it and put that aside. And there's always going to be loose ends, and I think in any book, there's always going to be some loose ends.
It's very interesting thing that you're saying, because sometimes in the storytelling structure and back to school times as well, they were saying there's an abrupt ending, and it's abrupt and shocking, and sometimes the audience, what was it about? So they're trying to figure it out, and I, as a reader, always wanted to try to figure it out, what actually happened. But sometimes some end is actually about the audience to make that decision what actually happened. So it's very interesting. It's for them to decide if the character was killed in the end, or there was some sort of a text about it, but it's a guessing game. So I sometimes prefer to have that maybe uh, understanding what actually happened. But you mentioned teaser, so which is also very important in the story structure. And also, do you always know what's going to happen in the end, or you come to this close to? So when you write the script of the book, say, do you know the end of the story? What's going to be the end straight away?
Yeah, I think that they talk about there's two different types of writers. There's plotters and pantsers. Pantsers are the
Thanks.
people that on the seat of the pants. I'm very much a plotter. I'm very pre-planned, and I
Mm-hmm.
write out a bit of a structure as to how the story is going to play out, and I've generally got a bit of an idea of how it's going to end. that can change. And sometimes I've gone on my own journey of discovery as I'm writing, and I come up with this brilliant, what I think is a brilliant idea, and it takes me down a different pathway. But usually I end up kind of back to where I set out to go. And I just find that that helps when you're writing an 90,000 word story. You need to have some structure, and you can tackle it by doing chapter by chapter or scene by scene. And if you kind of know where you're heading, you can kind of keep the pace going, and you don't get lost in your own story. So for me, it is very important to have some sense of structure. And I actually find that as being a writer, there's two parts of it. There's the actual writing, and then there's the phase of actually coming up with the concept and the ideas. And I spend a lot of time just sitting and thinking, and coming up with ideas as to where my next story will be. And I actually find that just as I get as much enjoyment out of that as I do the actual writing component. So coming up with the ideas and coming up with a story that people are going to enjoy reading and challenge them and be something a little bit different, not just cliche and something that's been done to death by other writers. So I find the biggest challenge is actually coming up with a story in the first place, which has got enough complexity and plot twists and interest and action and this sort of thing, that when people come back to you saying, I love your story, that for me is my greatest greatest ambition, is to have a story that people enjoy reading.
That's fantastic. So where are the readers being able to buy your book? I'm going to bring on the screen your Instagram right now for our audience as well. I was so involved in the conversation that I forgot actually to share your Instagram. So the Instagram of Jack Roney. So we've got his website, www.jackroney.com.au, and you will be able to follow Jack. You will be able to get to know his stories, the Angels Wept. That's the book one in the series. The video production, all of those things you will be able to tackle. And I guess for example, if I want to grab a book and buy a book, where do I go?
So the ebook is available on Amazon for less than $2 for Australians. So you can grab it very easily and very cheaply. So for less than $2, you can get my book on Amazon as a Kindle ebook. If you love it, please leave a review, because it's really important for authors to get those reviews so we can get that sort of exposure. And also the paperback is it's on this side here. So this is the paperback, which is available in Australia. The best way, it's on some local bookstore shelves here in Brisbane, but you can also contact me directly through my website, through social media, and I love being able to send signed copies out to people. So make contact with me through my social media channels and website, just a quick email or a message, and if you're in Australia, I'm happy to sign a copy for you and post it to you.
That's amazing. This is so easy. Absolutely easy. And obviously, what's next for you? What's next? What we want to expect next from Jack Roney? You still in? Are you writing the next one?
Yeah, book 2 and book 3.
Book 2 and book
written,
3.
But they still need a lot of editing. So I'm halfway through editing book 2. I'm under a lot of pressure by people saying, I loved your first book. When's book 2 coming out? So really under pressure to get book 2 out there. So at the moment, I'm going through a fairly intensive editing process, and the editing process, you need to get other people to take a look at it. It's got to go through professional editors, and so there is a bit of a process, and then there's all the publication process. So that's my next primary goal, is to get book 2 out, and then hopefully book 3. And then I've also, as I said, I've got this other entirely different project, my 4th book, which is a standalone book, which is not linked to the 3-book series. So I'm hoping that I can, concurrently, I'll be also working on that one. So while the first 3 books are being published, I'm probably going to also get my 4th book published as well, somewhere in between, so that the readers can get a taste of something different that I've written as well. So I feel I've got a lot of projects on the go.
Sounds like a lot. You're busy. And the last question: how did it feel the first time when your book was published? Just that feeling of the book, your first book was published. How did it feel?
I have to say that there was probably some trepidation for me as you know, as a serving police officer, making sure that that people are happy with what I've written. So I've been very careful to make sure that what I've written doesn't identify people. It's not offensive, and again, it reflects on me as a professional person. So I was a bit, yeah, there was some trepidation around how it would be received by work colleagues and other people in my social network. And but I've had overwhelming support, and I've had support from areas that I wasn't expecting to get support from. So I was very reluctant at first to put myself out there, because you have to really put yourself out there, and it was quite confronting as a police officer who's writing fiction to do that. And now that I've kind of sort of confronted my fear of that, I'm really been spurred on by the amazing support that I've had by people. So now that I've overcome my initial feeling of fear, and also scrutiny and criticism and all that, because I've been getting such overwhelming support, that's really spurred me on to keep going with this.
That's fantastic. Support is absolutely important, you know, because you've got that motivation, and acknowledging the fact that other people see you as the professional and they want you to keep going rather stopping on doing what you actually do.
And you know,
Thank you. It's yeah. Show me.
sorry, what drives me is I've got this book it's a tangible thing, my legacy. So you know, it's something that my kids can read and pass on, and when I'm old and grey, and you know, always so for me, the greatest achievement is to actually have produced something that you're proud of, and that's exciting, and that's what keeps me going.
Absolutely. It's nearly like you have a trace in the history now, because it's a book and it's available, and reading it, and you know, it's incredible. Yeah. And I think it takes a lot of time and effort to put into writing a book, and as you say, editing process can take you ages before it gets into the publishing. Yeah. So I know as a blogger it's not the same, but still I can understand. I sometimes drafting the story for several weeks. Yeah. So, um, well, what I should say thank you so much for coming in today. It was very interesting conversation. I personally learned quite a bit, and I'm sure I've seen some people who are watching put their likes and hearts. I was carried away by the conversation. I even forgot to put the Instagram and show your social media links, because I was just listening. So thank you so much for coming in. I will put in all your links leading to your social media and website as well. So, and the video is going to go on YouTube as well. I've got a YouTube channel, interviews with Australian business series blog. So, and also I'll put it in my personal blog as well. So it's going to be shared across Australia. So thank you so much for coming in, and we expecting more work from you. Please keep working. So please don't stop. I personally will probably tackle into Amazon and grab a book as well to read. My husband, he loves thrillers and detective stories, and Christmas time is coming anyway, so three good presents, couple of books for him. So thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, Anastasia. Appreciate the time, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.